Thanks for joining us today. We're going to talk about the Looker difference, a sort of new approach to doing data and analytics and BI. My name is Daniel Mintz. I'm Looker's Chief Data Evangelist. And with me today, I have
Jeff Gerdot, and I am Looker's VP of Customer Success.
Cool. And I think longtime Looker customers. We'll talk a little bit about our experience. So we're not coming at this so much from just the perspective of Looker, but really our perspective from dealing with data and analytics in the real world, in the field, dealing with some of the systems that came before and sort of where we are now. So without further ado, let's kick it off. So for those of you who maybe have been in BI for a long time or work in a large enterprise that has been doing BI for a long time, you're probably pretty familiar with the first wave of BI, what we call the first wave of BI, the sort of monolithic BI stack. And to give a sense of what that looks like, it's a pretty simple system. It's a pretty expensive system, but it's a pretty simple system, right? And back in the sort of 1980s, when this was first taking hold and people were really using data and analytics for the first time, the reason that systems were architected like this was because you didn't have any other choice, right? You had to buy a very expensive database or data warehouse, but probably a database in the 80s. And it would get trucked in on an 18-wheeler. You'd pay, $1 million for the database. And you would sort of shrink and, cube and summarize all of your data that you had to try to get it into this database so that you could run a couple of queries on it and produce some dashboards, maybe a report or two. And, you didn't really have much choice because the underlying database was really slow. And so every decision that you made was about how to reduce the size of the data, reduce the complexity of the data so that the database could handle it, and so that, God forbid, Jeff, I know that you have some experience with systems like this. Maybe you want to share.
Definitely, yeah. So I came from Merrill Lynch, which was one of those larger companies I think you were referencing, where there is several monoliths kind of floating about doing BI and helping people serve reports, along with the monolithic reporting layer, which the classic players that exist in that space, and all of the tooling that they built, which was all really cutting edge at the time to try and protect that database from having a query run against it. And the pain from that is, that's where DBA became don't bother asking. That was the gate to prevent you from running stuff on, prevent you from having to buy yet another gigantic machine to replace the already gigantic machine you had.
Yeah, I like that idea of actually protecting the database from users, right? It was all about putting up this layer to keep people from asking questions.
Basically, to keep people from answers. That wasn't, I think, conceptually the goal, but I think that's just how it ended up playing out in the end, right?
Yeah. And so, I think not surprisingly, this meant the data was pretty inaccessible, right? You maybe had your one dashboard, your one report, and so you could obviously get access to those, no problem. But we, didn't have access to anything beyond that. And so not surprisingly, I think people were pretty frustrated by that. They, didn't have access to the data beyond what was already in the existing dashboards. And so they would stand in line and, maybe request a change to a tile on the dashboard, and they, have to find an executive sponsor for that.
Every time you wanted to have a change on that dashboard, it was a serious investment typically, right? You're looking at like fleets of consultants that you would bring in order to build and vet and get that report working, and the cost of that was very high and potentially had cost ramifications down the rest of that monolithic stack because, God forbid that query or that report that you wanted required data that wasn't already there, in which case now it's not just the data analyst, it's the whole ETL team needs to be involved in pulling this data in and cleaning it and making sure that it's organized in a way that will perform well in that monolithic database so you can have that tile on your dashboard.
Yeah, and I think as a result, people got pretty frustrated, and so they, they'd stand in line once, twice, and then by the third time they'd say, you know what, I'm just going to make the decision.
I'll just wing this one.
Yeah, go by gut feel. So what happens is as technology tends to do, the technology starts to evolve, and so you still have this monolithic stack, but you start adding more data sources, right? We go from a world where people are actually data entry clerks to a world where machines are producing data much more regularly. And so, the number of data sources that people want access to in the enterprise is growing. And at the same time, the computers that people have access to are getting faster and more powerful. And so, instead of only having that giant thing that lives in your your server farm, you now maybe have a report that, can be generated by, a server in your department, or maybe even a desktop sitting on your desk. And so people want access to more data. They're tired of waiting in those bread lines. And so what happens is they start connecting to build other reports, other dashboards. And that seems like a great idea in theory. But the number of sources that people are connecting to grows and grows, and the places that people are surfacing data grows and grows, and the number of people who are sort of making up their own interpretation of the data grows and grows.
And I think there's another aspect to this too, is just data volumes were increasing, and I think faster than what your ETL team or your BI team could keep up with, right? Yeah. There was no agile methodology even integrated into this. It was very much a waterfall kind of process to bring your data in and get it onboarded and get that report built. And so you have these new data sources showing up and this new data that's available. People want to do something with it now to extract that business value. If you're going to wait for your whole data warehouse team to catch up, the business is going to suffer. And so the response to that and building out and empowering everyone with these tools with their high-powered desktops or eventually laptops, super important for business value, right?
Yeah, and I think, but the reality of it is pretty complicated because, the way that people are operating on this data is not necessarily or not likely connecting directly to the source, but rather extracting data from the source so that they can get it onto their desktop so that they can do some stuff with it.
Yep.
And, that means that the data that they have is stale. Right? It's not fresh because it's been disconnected from its source.
Static.
It's static. It doesn't come with the business logic baked in the way that the dashboards that were blessed by IT did. And so people are having to sort of interpret the data on their own,
yep.
Which if it's data that they're very familiar with, it's probably fine. But when it gets to be data that they're not so familiar with or data that they've never seen before.
Second and third hand data.
Yeah.
Passed down. Yeah.
Oh yeah, we use this report because somebody built it and they've since left the company, but it's really important to us. And so
I asked the IT guy and he was like, I'm too busy, but I found this report in our shared drive and it has the word revenue in it. So I'm just going to go after that and hope that it gets me there.
And so, I think the idea, the motivation to get rid of the bread lines was great. The motivation to not rely only on these monolithic stacks that were very expensive was great. But at the same time, people kind of said, well, and we don't need that whole data model thing anymore, that thing where we sort of come up with a shared meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that may have been throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Ultimate of empowerment, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's empowered.
Right. And so, I think everything goes along fine until you get into a meeting and, there's somebody from marketing, somebody from finance, and somebody from sales. And sales says, hey, sales are through the roof. And marketing says, no, they're not, they're down. And finance says, actually, they're flat.
I've been in plenty of those meetings where it's like our revenue was X million, according to your merchandise planning team, and then our revenue was Y million according to finance, and then it turns into, okay, why don't these match meeting of trying to decipher. They both say revenue, but they're not the same number in a very significant way.
Yeah.
And then it's a bunch of time wasted, right? The best case scenario, everyone is cordial and friendly about it. The worst case scenario is someone feels threatened and it turns into a large argument.
Yeah, it becomes politics, right?
Yeah.
Because not surprisingly, people often come with interpretations of the data that reflect nicely on their particular department. And
marketing's not bringing enough people. That's the problem.
Yeah,
That's
clearly. We analyze the funnel over here in sales. And so, I think this is better in some ways than the sort of first wave, but, the agility is great.
Yep.
But
people are talking from a place of data, which previously was more difficult.
Right.
So better,
but there are some significant issues. And when I talk to, folks who are in the field, they just see this everywhere, right? Nobody has sort of fully evolved out of this place of data chaos. And so I think, we started talking about technology and how it constrained what was possible starting back in the 80s, but it's important to sort of take note of something that happened, I'd say starting in the early 2000s and then really accelerating more recently, where, we went from this world where databases, as we said, were very slow and extremely expensive, required a, $500,000, $1 million CapEx upfront.
Single machine.
Yeah. To a world where databases are really ridiculously fast. They cost pennies. You can rent them by the hour in the cloud, right? It's an OpEx that you can, you could go try these databases out right now.
The concept of a DBA is actually a little different now than it used to be, right?
DevOps.
It becomes DevOps essentially because all of the maintenance and running and monitoring is like in the cloud. It's all automated in some capacity, right?
And so I think historically this starts with Hadoop and the ability to sort of process huge volumes of data that way, but then comes back to the sort of SQL world, both with the SQL on Hadoop dialects, but also with then, Vertica and Redshift. I think Redshift really is a milestone in terms of the widely available. This is Amazon's easy, widely available.
You have that MPP wave where everyone's sharding out databases, right? And then from that MPP wave, you get this NoSQL kind of world where people are kind of cobble stuff together again. And then we kind of end up in a place now where we're seeing things like BigQuery that's just like completely new take on even how this system works. Where
or a Snowflake, which was architected from the ground up. Yeah, so, I think if big data maybe one thing that it absolutely did deliver on was really a huge revolution in data processing technology. And so, now what I think a lot of people's stack looks like and what their data world looks like is not this so much as this, right? So same chaos on top, same analytic tools on top, really powerful database underneath. And not surprisingly, you're not going to get a ton of value out of this big new investment or not investment, this OpEx on this big database, if you don't change the stuff on the top, right?
Yeah, or the investment shrinks, the performance grows, but the value that you could be getting isn't being tapped into.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, it's like, buying your new HD TV and plugging your VCR in, right?
Yeah.
It's not going to be great.
Or Betamax.
Or Betamax, right. Maybe time to upgrade to, at least DVD, perhaps Blu-ray, 4K would be great. So, I think this is something we still see a lot of. A lot of people live in this world. I think actually a shocking number of people to me still live in the first wave world. But, I think what we're here to tell you is that a better way is possible, right? And what that tends to look like is this big, powerful database underneath, but rather than having to shrink and cube and summarize all your data to make it fit, you actually can just kind of load it in these days, right? These databases, beyond having just a ton of horsepower, can also deal with sort of dirty, weirdly shaped data much better than the databases of old days could.
Yep, and then the need to structure and format and design that data has kind of fallen away with its ability to perform.
Yep.
I'm not forced into this like read optimized star schema world anymore because I can throw in just a big old JSON file and move through that fast enough.
Yeah,
right?
you can move to a world, maybe not a pure ELT, extract, load, and then transform, but maybe you do a little transformation, then you do the load, then you do some more transformation in the database.
ETLT?
Yeah, ETLT, TTTT or something. And so once you have all this data dumped into this big old data warehouse or data lake, then you can put a data platform on top of it. And once you have a data platform on top of it, now everybody can still access the data that they need. They still have all that agility, but because they're all coming through this same layer, they are not making up the meaning on the fly, right?
Yeah, there's that translation layer in between it. So when finance pulls revenue and when merchandise planning pull revenue, they know that they're looking at the same revenue.
Right, because that's defined in one place in the data platform, and when they go looking for revenue, It's the definition of
That's the definition that's there. And if the data platform is a really nice piece of software, you can actually have some lineage through that as well. So you can follow back to be like, okay, where is this revenue actually coming from?
Right. You can trace it all the way back to its source because you're not working on an extract. The data is fresh.
Yep.
And so you can always trace all the way back to the source, which from an auditing perspective is fantastic because you can understand not just, oh, why is this the definition, but where did this come from? Who changed it last? Why was it changed? And so, it's just a whole different world in terms of the trustworthiness of the data that you have accessible to.
Yep. And having this platform on top now opens this world of agility that maybe wasn't achievable in that first and second wave, right? Having a platform that allows you to move quickly and adjust your definitions without having to go through an entire ETL workflow and make sure the performance of it will do the correct thing, allows you to move more quickly, allows you to respond as your business is responding, allows you to integrate that new data source instantly rather than having to wait for someone to go do something in the back end.
And I will also say that, as I was building out a data stack sort of from scratch, feeding into Redshift back in 2012 and 2013, and we needed a bunch of data sources, and there were not good options on the market to do that for us, to connect the data and put it in Redshift for us. So we built it ourselves, and it was terrible. It really was an enormous time suck. Even once we got it up and running, the maintenance just never went away because, Facebook changed their ads API and they didn't even notify us. So now we have to go figure out why our entire ETL is broken. Oh, Salesforce added this field. Now we have to go fix our ETL because the whole thing's broken, right? And luckily, that is not the world that we live in anymore. We have some wonderful partners who we work with who all they do is build connectors, right? And so for literally hundreds, it might even be above 1,000 different sources, common sources. You say, hey, I have Zendesk data. I would like it to be in my BigQuery cluster. Can you make that happen?
Plug it in.
And they say, sure, type in your credentials and we're good to go and we'll pipe it in, right? I mean, we're even seeing some of the biggest players like Google, bring in their BigQuery data transfer service where they say, you probably use YouTube and you probably use, DoubleClick and you probably use AdWords and Google Analytics. If you want that raw data available to you in your BigQuery instance, we'll just pipe it there for you. And so, that big scary ETL process that you used to have to, hire a bunch of people to manage is getting a lot simpler.
Yep. Also evolving away.
Yeah. So great. So now we've sketched out this paradise that could exist. Hopefully everyone is salivating and just wishes that they lived there. But lots of people don't. And so I think it's important to say, well, why has this not just taken hold?
And I was asking myself this question a number of years ago. I was like sitting there, with this product from Big Blue and being like, this is so hard. There's got to be a better way.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think, the thing about technology is technology doesn't change the way people do things. Technology may be necessary for people to change the way they do things, but it's not sufficient, right? Yeah.
And it's a trigger, but there has to actually be something happening after that trigger.
There's a cultural change that has to come with the technology, right? Something as simple as like, you don't have to make plans and pick a spot where you're going to meet up at an exact time before you leave the house anymore because you have a phone in your pocket, right?
No more like calling collect and saying your name really fast in the phone in order to get your message across. You can just call them on your cell phone.
Yeah. So, that's a huge cultural change, but it took some time.
Yeah.
And similarly, I think, people need to embrace this and embrace the cultural change if they're going to get the full value from the technology. And
thankfully, with this change, there's enough incentive behind it, right?
Absolutely. And I think what we see is that, this shift doesn't just happen on its own. It requires leaders. Often those leaders are both sort of leading from the top of the company. They might be in the C-suite and somebody who says, we need to get serious about the way we do data. That's great. Those people don't necessarily know exactly what that means or how to accomplish it. But you also need leaders at the bottom who say, hey, marketing, I bet you would love to have some more data. We can help you do your job better. Let me show you what's possible, right? Yeah. And they can lead the way there.
Or even just hearing the problem and being like someone in marketing, being like, if only I can get at this data more quickly, like what can I do?
Yeah.
And asking that question and reaching out to to the C-suite or to the technology groups within their company.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's really nice is that there is the demand, right? I mean, it's not you're not trying to sell something to people who don't want it, because we see this across every department. There are people who have come up in a world where they realize, yeah, if I had the right data at the right time, I could make better decisions.
Yeah, I mean, just like DevOps engineer, right? Like understanding your usage across your entire Amazon cloud, you can save thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars a month, depending on how big you are, just knowing like, oh, actually all these instances don't really do anything. We're not using this cluster anymore. Let's turn it off. Having access to that data and being able to analyze your pattern allow you to find optimizations in the DevOps world.
And I think, quantitative marketer, really any marketer these days is a quantitative marketer in the sense that they are spending a lot of money on advertising and other things, and they really would love more visibility into what's working, and not just what's causing people to click, but what's causing people to sign up, what's causing people to become good customers. Who are the good customers? Which ad campaigns are leading to the best customers? They want all of that. They know they could do a better job.
Totally.
On your team, customer success.
Yep. I mean, 100%. Understanding the risk profile of our customer, their behavior within the product, like where are they going? What are they doing? The data that comes out of that we get to look at and helps us to make the decision of like, do we need to drop in here and like sit down with these folks and like really get them into a place that they're finding that value. It's like super, super key, and having access to that is like super powerful.
Yeah, and so, I think it's up to us as data people to empower these workers, right? They want it. They know that they could do a better job if they had the right data, but we have to empower them because they're not going to find their way to it on their own. And I think the reality is that for the people who are still living in the world of data chaos, it's very hard to use data effectively in that world.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it just turns into arguments when you try to use data effectively in that world. And so you're either just going on gut and finding consensus on your gut reaction, you're arguing over that data, or worst case, you're in a stalemate, right?
Yeah. Well, actually, I'd say worst case, you think you understand the data, you've misinterpreted it, you make a decision, and then 6 months later you realize you were using bad data and you're out of business, right? Yeah. So, I think we are on the cusp of something really amazing, right? The sort of promise of big data. I know we've moved on to new buzzwords like AI and machine learning and deep learning, but the promise of big data is actually starting to come to fruition.
Totally. I mean, my thermostat now knows what to adjust the temperature to before I go touch it.
Yeah.
It's pretty exciting. And there's more to come, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's like just the beginning.
Because I think we really are in a place where we can actually give every person, right, the answers and insights that they need to succeed. So, that's sort of the sort of philosophical underpinnings, if you will, of sort of how we come at this problem of getting value from data. And I think fundamentally what people actually want is they want the best of both worlds from wave one and wave two, right? They want all the governance and standards and scalability that came with wave one, but they want agility. They want the flexibility to do what they need to do. They want to be able to self-serve to the data in a way that was never possible with wave one without losing the stuff, the standards and governance. And, fundamentally that's what Looker offers, right? Yeah. And, that's not just our saying that, there are just an incredible list of companies who are doing this, who are finding new powerful ways to use data to do business better. And it's not just the newest companies. It is, they're certainly well represented. The BuzzFeeds and Amazons and, Deliveroo's are certainly well represented, but, IBM and Sears and Hearst and MassMutual are hardly new kids on the block. Totally. They're venerable brands, right, that have been around for 100+ years in some cases. And they are looking at what's possible and saying, we want to do this. And they're doing it.
We need to do this.
We need to do this, right, to evolve with the times. So, in terms of how Looker does this, I think it's really important to realize that the world that the other tools were built in were really constrained by the technology of the time, whether that was the big monolithic appliances or it was the desktop on your, in your department. They weren't making dumb decisions at the time. They just had a very different set of options.
And set of tools and even circumstances, right?
Yeah. And so Looker, by virtue of being built in this world of very fast, very cheap databases, can actually leverage those databases in a brand new way. So that really anybody in the organization can view and explore the data, and not just that, they can then act act on the data,
Yep.
because that's really what it's about, right? So, just to sort of map out sort of how we approach this, right? One key differentiator, I think, is that the data stays in your database.
Yeah. We're not copying it to some magical location on your laptop or somewhere that it can go stale,
Yeah.
or get out of sync with what's up.
Or even some proprietary data engine, right? We're saying, look, Google and Amazon and Snowflake and all the others are doing a pretty darn good job of building some pretty incredible data processing technology. Let's use that. You've invested in that. Let's actually leverage it, right? Second thing is what we call LookML, which is our modeling language. It's the way that everybody in the organization comes together and agrees what does revenue mean? What is the precise definition of revenue that we want to use across the company? Yep. And I've heard some, great stories, and I've been involved in some great stories where these actually, it forced some hard conversations where people, dove into those gnarly Excel, formulas and said, hey, finance, your Excel doc says that this is how you're defining revenue, but sales says it's this way and logistics says it's this way. And maybe we should all get on the same page.
Totally. Yeah. Or even diving into those Excel docs and discovering that we've been looking at the data wrong for a while.
Yeah.
I've definitely seen that happen as well.
And so putting it in a place that's, that's clear, that's sort of has bite-sized definitions that you can actually examine and understand, that's version controlled, so you can see when a definition changed, why it changed, by whom it was changed.
And the risk of changing is reduced as a result, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a really critical piece of the way Looker approaches things, that gives us consistency, and it gives us, agility across the enterprise. And then, of course, as we said, leveraging all of today's technology. So it's not just about the database layer, it's also about the fact that Looker runs in your browser. There is no desktop application to install. Looker has a full RESTful API coverage, because we think that's how applications should be built these days. Looker, can talk to the APIs of all the other tools that you are using and push data to them, because we think that's really important for a data platform, that you're able to meet people where they're at.
And so it allows you to do things that go beyond just hey, here's a dashboard, right? And by being built on like a more modern technology stack, it can integrate into your entire ecosystem of your company. So it allows you to even start operationalizing some of these things to increase that value from just an idea that you get out of a dashboard to actual action that's happening to power your campaigns with Facebook, for example.
Yeah. And so to just actually dig in a little bit on the LookML on our modeling language, because I really do think that idea is at the heart of what Looker does. I think, Jeff, you're a developer by trade. And so well that people do not generally program computers with switches anymore.
No, punch cards.
Punch cards is the current vogue.
Current vogue, yeah.
So people started with switches. They decided that assembly was better. Assembly, became C, which then people make C++ and Java, and they say, I don't want to have to worry about the memory, and then that becomes
the old story of every generation is built on top of the one before it, right? And it's this evolving story, and increasing amounts of benefit come from each evolution.
Yeah.
So when I'm writing Scala, I can do that. One line of Scala is like worth hundreds of lines of Java, right? As an example. So I can be way more efficient and get way more value.
Yeah, you've abstracted away the stuff that you don't want to have to worry about, so that you can worry about the stuff you actually care about, which is building cool stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah. And if you need to get down into the internals and you've got some performance bug, you can go do that. But you generally, 99% of the time, you're not.
Yep.
So I am not a developer by trade. I'm an analyst by trade. So let me tell you what this looks like from the analyst side with SQL. So in the olden days, we wrote SQL. We sent it to the database and we got data back. And then later, we wrote T-SQL and we sent it to the database and got data back. And then later, we wrote MySQL or PostgreSQL and got data back from the database. And
doesn't sound like it's changing
much. Hasn't changed that much. So, I think that for whatever reason, analysts have not grown the way that developers have. And I love SQL. It thinks the way that I do about data, and I love it to death. But I also am fully aware of all of its flaws, right? The lack of reusability, the fact that I can't collaborate with anybody because I have my own style of writing SQL, which is different than every other person in the world's style of writing SQL. The fact that I can't even read queries that I wrote 2 weeks ago because they're 200 lines tall and I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to start this from scratch. It's much simpler. I don't know what I was thinking 2 weeks ago.
I mean, getting into debugging and maintenance, and
God.
it's just all a nightmare, right?
It's a nightmare. So, I think where LookML comes in is says, let's build on SQL, right? Let's keep SQL at the heart of it because it has all of this power, this flexibility. It's the lingua franca of analytics, but let's deal with some of those flaws, right? And so, let's add reusability by making stuff bite-sized so you can actually read it and understand it. Let's add Git so that you can do version control and collaborative work. Let's use this idea of extensibility so that I can define something one place and then use that definition another place without having to rewrite the whole definition, right? Let's use the sort of dry methodology, don't repeat yourself, which also comes from sort of developers, that I want to define a variable one time. And if I need to change it because something changes about my data, that's easy because I go change it one place and then that flows out to every other place.
Let's abstract away needing to worry about what data source I'm
That's right.
up against.
Yeah, I don't want to have to remember what the specific format of date diff is for Postgres versus BigQuery versus MySQL.
Yeah.
Right?
So then there's even the other benefit of just I want to change my data source. It becomes like a much easier exercise to work.
You don't have to go and rewrite all of your SQL.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so what LookML lets you do is it gives you a language for creating the language of your business specifically, right? Because every business's language is different, right? The things that matter to your business are really different than every other business. Are there some shared things? For sure. But, the same way that nobody's Salesforce implementation is exactly the same.
Yep.
Every business has its own language.
No one's data dictionary.
No one's data dictionary is the same. And so you need a tool, a way to define that for your business that is a living document. And that's exactly what
and will evolve with you at the pace of your business.
That's right. So we're gonna jump in to a demo pretty soon. But before we do that, I just wanted to sort of show you architecturally what exactly Looker looks like. So, you probably have a whole bunch of different data sources. Most of the companies we work with do. That probably includes some SaaS applications. It probably includes a transactional database that keeps track of your business, your sales. Might include an ERP, some web analytics, probably a bunch of other stuff. And as we said earlier, the process of getting the data out of those and into a centralized warehouse or lake or database used to be a pretty scary thing. There are some great folks who will just do it for you, just make it happen. And so once you've got that data into whatever SQL database you're going to use, whether that's Spark or Presto or Postgres or MySQL or BigQuery or Redshift or Snowflake or on and on, I think we're up to supporting 35 different dialects of SQL. That's where Looker comes in. So Looker sits on top of that database. It gives you that governed transformation layer with that agile modeling layer. And it uses that to send SQL to your database, get the results back, and deliver them to you. And it also does things like version control your logic. It manages your connections. It manages your users and your security, right? And so once you've got this agile modeling layer in Looker, then you can access the data in a whole bunch of different ways. So most customers make some use of our web interface so that they can do some self-serve exploration. They can use our interactive D3-based visualizations. They might also want to export the data to send it somewhere else, and that's fine. But whereas with most systems, that's kind of where it stops. There's a lot more you can do once the data is in the platform. So you can schedule delivery. That's been built into Looker for a really long time. You can do that by email for sure. Most people make use of that. But you can also deliver webhooks so that you can deliver data to other applications. You can push data to an S3 bucket if you want to archive it. You can send something by FTP to your clients. You can also embed Looker, right in Salesforce or in an iframe or, using our JavaScript events to sort of talk between the page that you've embedded and the Looker embed. And as we said, we have full RESTful API coverage so that everything that you could do manually through the interface, you can actually also do programmatically through the API.
So yeah, with the whole interface leveraging that API, it gives you that access to integrate it into the rest of your web stack, to have Looker reports or visualizations or text show up on your website for your customers to see and interact with or download data through. It's kind of that that full breadth of interactivity allows you to leverage it in so many different ways within your organization to really get the most out of all of that data that you're bringing together in that data store.
So I'm going to jump into a demo. If the screen share gods are kind. There we go. And it may take a second for folks to buffer, but so what we're looking at here is a Business Pulse dashboard in Looker's demo environment. This probably does not look that different from most other dashboards that folks have seen. We've got our interactive map, so we can sort of see individual spends. We've got how many new users we've got. We've got sales year over year. All the sort of straightforward stuff that you would expect. But because Looker is connected directly to your database, all of the underlying data is always accessible, right? So we could change filters here if we wanted. If we wanted to go to the past 91 days instead of the past 90 days, we could certainly do that, and we could just run this, right? We can change this freely because all of this data is available. So now we've got the past 91 days. But we can also say, oh, this is interesting. Look at that. There was a spike there on February 26th, right? We got a spike in sweater orders.
Yeah, what's behind that spike?
What's behind that spike? That's a good question. So let's drill in by hour, see if there's something interesting. Well, we had a lot of orders on at 10 o'clock a.m. Interesting, and it looks like actually the sweaters though came later in the day. 3 sweaters ordered in the 7 o'clock hour. But
now this isn't though just like you're looking at a summarization and then now you've drilled across to another summarization,
no, this
right?
is the underlying data. So I chose to drill, but I also could say I just want to see all 22 sweaters that were ordered.
Yeah.
Right? So I can do this. I can see which sweaters were ordered. The fabulous Jeffrey Bean men's cotton fancy diamonds mark sweater, great name, ordered by Howard Castillo. So we were talking a little bit about the sort of way that Looker can fit into existing workflows. So one way is I might say, oh, I think Howard is a great customer, and I want to send him an email through SendGrid. Well, Looker can talk to SendGrid, so I could send him an email that says, thank you, Howard Castillo. Thanks for your loyalty. I could send him that right there without having to jump over to another tool. I could also jump to Howard's user dashboard to understand, what kind of customer Howard has been. He's got 3 lifetime orders and, a solid lifetime spend. Looks like he's based up in New Jersey. In New York, so most of his stuff is properly shipping out of the Port Authority of New York.
Probably black as well in color. I'm not sure if it shows there, but in New York.
And then yes, we've got our nice user avatar here, and then we could do a lot more. So because Looker lives on the internet, we could say, oh, I could see the Docker's analytics dashboard, or I could go check out the Docker's website. I could go straight to there from here. I can do that from all of these. So I could go to the Columbia website to learn more about what they're offering. So this sort of full interactivity is built in everywhere in Looker. Now the other thing that I could do is I could show those 22 orders. And I might not be satisfied with this. I could explore from here. And this is a really key capability that Looker brings, where because we've got the whole database underneath, we could also look at days to process. I want to add that to each of these orders so I can see how many days it took to process each of these orders. So I've just added that. And now I'm going to run this query. And once I get the result, I could sort on that and say, ooh, that's not good. It was 8 days to process. But to go back to that idea of a sort of centralized definition layer, I might be curious, well, what exactly is days to process? How is that defined? And this is where the stuff that's happening behind the scenes that business users are probably never seeing, but the analysts are seeing is happening. And so I can always, if I have the right permissions, I could always go to the LookML. And that's what's defining this idea of days to process. So days to process is not a field in my database, in a table in my database. It's actually a complex case statement based on what status the order is in. So, if it's processing, then it's the date diff between when the order was created and now. If it's been shipped, complete, or returned, then it's the difference between when it was created and when it's shipped. If it's canceled, then it's null, right? And so this is defined very clearly here, and drives the what we're seeing here. And so I can actually see the SQL that Looker is generating, and sure enough, there is the case statement based on that. And we can see, here's the 1.0. And the really interesting thing is right now I'm in production, but I have a development mode where I can actually mess around. I can try new things without affecting anybody else, which is a really safe way to do that. And so I could, for example, change this from 1 to 1.2 just because. I could save it and then go back to my query. All I have to do is refresh. And now I'm in development mode, so nobody else is going to see this, but we can see that there is my 1.2, right? So the 1.2 that I just created is now safe, and I might decide, oh, that was actually a dumb thing, and I don't want to do that. I'm going to revert my changes, get rid of those, go back to production, done that, and now when I refresh this, sure enough, I get my SQL and we're back to 1.0.
And so just to kind of summarize, right, it's like we can go and look at the business logic that drives that metric. And this isn't too much more scary than what you might find in someone's massive Excel document in terms of understanding what that business logic is. And if you have the right permissions, you can actually go to a safe place and experiment with that business logic without impacting the rest of the company, right? So when you change that to 1.2, it's just you interacting with that as 1.2
right.
and getting a feel for, like, is this the right thing? Like, is this really where we want to take the company before exposing everyone else to your crazy idea?
And while this is not that complicated, I could do something crazy. Like I could pivot by which distribution center sent the order and, add a total sale price field. And now the SQL is getting a little crazier. Looker knows how to write it, but luckily I do not have to write this because no thanks. I don't want to do that.
And I mean, you imagine back to, those data bread lines, and it's like, is there an analyst who then, when you're asking for something that feels trivial, is trivial in Excel, but now someone's going to go and have to write that SQL to make that happen, right?
And so I'm going to pop back out of developer mode so that I'm not, so now I'm looking at what everyone else is looking at. And I think, just a couple more things, and then we're going to go to questions. So if folks have questions, you should drop them in now. But just a couple more things that I think are really great about the sort of technology that Looker can leverage. I also can, for example, I can take this, maybe I'm in charge of the, New York, New Jersey area, right? So I care about this, but let's do the whole tri-state area. So I care about New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. I don't care about the rest of the country. So I'm going to, filter on those, and get all of these tiles just for those, that part of the country. So there we go. There's our New York, New Jersey, Connecticut. And I don't actually want to have to log into Looker all the time to see what's going on. I want this report in my inbox every Monday morning. So I can schedule this with my filters and, get it. I don't need it every day. I'm going to get it weekly on Mondays at, 9 New York time. And so now I can, get that without even having to come to Looker. It's just going to be given to me. Another thing I can do is, in terms of sharing, I can, I've applied some custom filters to this, right? Here, I'll apply some ridiculous filters. Like, I only want the last 89 days in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut. So I'm going to run this. Looker, I don't have to do anything special to share this. I might say, oh, there's something really interesting here. I'm going to send this to my colleague, Jeff. So I send this over to Jeff. Jeff pops that URL into his browser, and assuming he has the right permissions, he's in the same place as me, right? 89 days, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, right? And this applies to everything that I do in Looker. I'm always only one copy and paste away from sharing something with my colleague.
Oh, right? I mean, in the world of like Slack and HipChat and all these chat programs, like this is like one of the most exciting features is like seeing people just sharing this data and like having the same context, starting from the same place in order to have the best discussion possible, right?
Yeah. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and jump back to the slides. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them in. And I'm also putting up the information if folks want to learn more. But so we got a great question. What technical skills are required to master LookML? So I would say if you already speak any flavor of SQL, picking up LookML is really fast. And it's actually not just me saying that. The Gartner Magic Quadrant, which just came out, where Looker debuted, also says exactly that. They say, LookML, because it's based on SQL, is going to make sense to just about any SQL developer quite quickly. And I would actually say I've seen people who are not even SQL developers make changes to LookML and feel comfortable because they know they can't do any damage, right? They're in developer mode. They try something, they make sure it works, they send it off to somebody else for code review, and then that person pushes it to production, assuming it's right.
In one of my past lives, we had our marketing team actually submitting LookML changes, right? And what I kind of saw is anyone who could do like a VLOOKUP in Excel or understand some of the more advanced features of Excel, they are fine. Like you didn't actually have to have the mastery of SQL. If you do, you'll be great hands down. But if you're a good Excel wizard, then you can get there too, or G Sheets or whatever flavor of spreadsheet you use.
So next question is, what sales, CRM, and ERP systems do you recommend that work best with Looker? So we are not we don't connect directly to the CRM and the ERP. As I said, that's something that we rely on an incredible group of partners to do. They do it cheaply, well, fast, all of those things, and they really, if it's a CRM or ERP that is in, even moderately widespread usage, one of our partners connects to it and can ship that data into one of the databases that we connect to. So, I almost never, I can't think of a single, instance where I've seen someone be unable to easily move data out of their CRM or ERP to a sort of centralized data store. But it's a great question. So another question, how do you differentiate with IBM Cognos Analytics? So I'm actually going to just cede the floor to you, Jeff, since you have a fair amount of experience with Cognos.
Yeah, so actually what I described earlier, using a product and wanting to move away from it, and it was IBM Cognos Analytics. And what I saw there is while a lot of the key technologies and tools are amazing, like they kind of grew up in that old legacy BI space, and there's this more agile evolution that has taken place, and that's something like Looker allows you to do. And so you move away from mandatory schema types that you have to work with to being able to work with any data just as it arrives, right? So it's not about star schemas anymore. It's about whatever kind of data you pull in. You move away from a more rigid dev cycle that you might get with an IBM framework manager to something that's much more open and easily accessible that you get in something like Looker. While definitely you can see similarities between those products, to me Looker is that evolution into the more agile and fluid world that we're in today, and that more Web 2. That
7.2.
That the development has like kind of progressed us into.
And so I'm just to dig in a little bit on that. I mean, that's I think a great description of the sort of technical architectural changes that have come about. What difference do you see that making for the business?
Yeah, I mean, for the business, it was a matter of, and this is again one of my motivations. It was a matter of like, me as heading the BI function at my company, having to say, all right, we're going to take a month to build this report and to get these new data types out to you. Let's sit down next to you and do this right now on the fly, right? And so refining that terminology of weeks on hand became like a 2-hour exercise with a person rather than a multi-month back and forth kind of thing. And so just the iteration and the speed at which we could provide data to our business users to make the best decision just like went through the roof. And that was the biggest change. And to me, that was the most frustrating thing with those legacy tools, is just the amount of time it took me to like make that change and get it out to my users.
To say nothing of the costs of bringing in consultants who are specialists.
I mean, hiring the IBM guy who's been doing it for life and knows all the ins and outs of all the different tools that you have to use in order to do it, right? Well, Looker's one interface on your web browser. Like anyone can kind of jump into it.
Yeah. So another great question: how do you configure security permissions? So the way that that Looker connects to your database is generally as a read-only user. That's the way that we sort of recommend connecting. We support all kinds of different sort of secure connection types, certainly SSH, but we can do IP whitelisting. We can do some tunneling. So we make sure that that connection between Looker and your database is rock solid and fully protected. And then, the way that security permissions are sort of inherited by users is very fine-grained. So we can, inherit permissions from LDAP or SAML groups. You can provision individual users with different access levels, down to the row or column level, where somebody might not have permission to see a sensitive field, and you can take that away from them. You can give people access to see the SQL or not to see the SQL, to edit the lookml or not edit the lookml. So I think all of that is fully configurable, and security is one of the highest priorities for us. Obviously, keeping our customers' data is secure is critical to us. We happily can deploy on-premise or in your private cloud if that's how you prefer to deploy, or we can deploy in a Looker-hosted cloud on AWS. And we do whichever makes sense for you. So another question: what do you do with NoSQL JSON data? So this is a great question. It goes back a bit to one of the things we were talking about how ETLs used to be really tricky because, somebody brought you JSON data. SQL databases don't do JSON data. What are you going to do, right?
I mean, I would actually, and just the evolution of the database, right? We're moving away from SQL databases no longer do JSON in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think that's not the world anymore.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, Postgres has an amazing array of JSON functions. We've actually found in BigQuery that in some cases, leaving it in JSON performs better than actually breaking it out into a tabular format, just because the functionality that they've built into that system allows you to traverse those JSON structures so efficiently and so fast that it's actually better to do that. And so a lot of this, we can just rely on the power of that database to do the right thing, and Looker renders the SQL in the way that traverses that JSON blob to get whatever you want out of it.
Yeah, I mean, Snowflake's another great example. They have a whole variant type which is built to handle semi-structured data like JSON.
Exactly.
And so you leave it in JSON, you load it into that variant field, and then Looker knows how to write appropriate, SQL that Snowflake understands so that it can traverse that JSON, so that it can untangle it for you. So another question about a product that I'm not familiar with called Beckon. So this is a marketing product, it looks like. This looks like it's kind of a connector tool that will pull in your marketing data for you. As I said, that's not where we focus. We focus on giving you sort of fully configurable ways to understand your data. So, we have tons of marketing use cases, people using us in marketing for marketing data, doing everything from sort of simple reporting all the way up through multi-channel attribution. The way that we get that data in, as I said, is by working with one of our great partners to pull that data in. And one of the things that's really nice for us about that is that, unlike a lot of other tools that are sort of vertically integrated stacks where they handle data ingestion, data storage, data analytics, and then data visualization for you, that does have its advantages. It seems nice until you start collecting more and more data, and their pricing goes up because, well, your data volume has gone up. And the reality of the big powerful databases today is that they are built to deal with just absurd amounts of data. And so Looker doesn't charge in any way, shape, or form based on how much data volume you have or how much data you're querying. And so, the price doesn't change based on that. Your AWS or Google bill might go up a couple of cents, but beyond that, Looker's pricing model isn't affected by that at all.
Yeah, I'd say that there's also like with the risk with some of those tools where it's pre-baked is like it's great for a very specific set of questions you can ask from it. Eventually, you will ask deeper questions, and that's when you start to hit that wall. With something like Looker, you get those basic questions, and in some cases, we've got a lot of the knowledge and experience to kind of help set that up right out of the box. Then you can ask the more advanced question. You can do those drill-ins like you were showing, and like get down to that row level and really understand your data in a better way.
Yeah, that's a good opportunity to bring up what we call Looker blocks, which are sort of pre-built analytic solutions that you can deploy an instance for free. So, for example, the Google Analytics data that Google will give you is pretty tough to make sense of, I would say. It's deeply nested, and not the kind of thing that your average analyst is experienced with. But we worked directly with Google, and we built out a block in LookML, which you can actually see on our blocks directory if you go there now. And it knows exactly how that data is structured because it's structured the same as for everybody. So it will parse that data. It will output dashboards, but those aren't fixed. That's a jumping off point. So you start with something, and then you can iterate and elaborate as your particular needs dictate. So another question about security. What are your countermeasures for thwarting attacks? We're SOC 2 compliant, which I know is a big issue for a lot of folks when we're hosting. We regularly do penetration tests as well. But I think beyond the sort of specifics of the way that we handle security, I think frankly one of the biggest issues with security, particularly when you're dealing with that sort of wave 2 world of data chaos, is that you've just got this data sprawl, right? People have big old CSVs that live on departmental servers, that live on their laptops. The data just lives everywhere, and so to be able to try to rein that in and reduce the attack surface is really hard. And people are not always great about not keeping sensitive data, PII on places it shouldn't be, and that really increases your threat level. Now, with Looker, you don't have that data sprawl because there's a single platform. So, if you delete something from your data warehouse or lock it down, it goes away for everybody instantly. And you don't have to worry about, it still might exist on a bunch of company laptops, right?
Yep. And we have a whole team dedicated to security and securing our environments. And we have conversations, weekly about what are we doing and how are we securing that. If we have a customer who needs the highest levels of security, like I know the U.S. government as a customer is one of those. Like we do offer on-prem, right? Yeah. And then they can take that into their own hands and they can create the security environment around the product that they feel the most comfortable.
Yeah, I mean that you can run it inside a private cloud or even in a box on premises. And so I think particularly for our more compliance heavy industries, finance and medicine particularly, they often choose to run on premise because they have those compliance requirements, and they want to make sure it's easier for their security team to just know this is run in-house on our server inside our firewall, and that's great and no problem for us.
Yeah, so we want to work with you. Like if you have security concerns, totally get it. Like we can work with that.
And I would also just say that because of the way that Looker works, the whole Looker application is just a jar file. So Looker ships a new upgrade every 4 weeks, which if Looker hosts for you, you just specify a maintenance window and the upgrade happens magically while you are sleeping. But if you host yourself, for folks who are in IT and have had the experience of trying to chase down every desktop version and every server version to make sure everybody's on the latest version, that is not how Looker upgrades work. Looker upgrades take 5 minutes, literally. It is pulling down the server, uploading the new jar, and then booting that up. And you do it once, and then you're done.
I remember a longtime Cognos guy on my team, once we had moved, we were like, all right, we're going to upgrade Looker today. We were hosting, and he restarted the jar, and he's like, what's next? And I was like, you're done. And he couldn't believe it, because it was an hours long XML editing file exercise in the Cognos land down to just what you described.
Yeah. Thank you for all the great questions. I feel like that covered a nice span of things about the way the Looker approaches things. Hopefully this has given you some perspective on on some different ways to do things now that the world is not one of slow, expensive databases. If folks have further questions, we would love to answer them. You can email us at discover@looker.com and someone will get right back to you with an answer. We will make this whole webinar available to you shortly. We'll send it to you by email so you can send it out to any colleagues that might want to take a look. But thanks for joining us, and we hope you learned something.
Have a good one.